Monday, May 20th, 2019. We have full board, so there are no alternates, so we don't have to point that. One thing, we have a lot of people here, we welcome you for the public hearing. We do have one application for the Boy Scout, and we could amend our agenda to move you up unless you want to see the process of a public hearing. You can go to, all right, can I have a motion to,
I'm going to make a motion to amend the agenda so that we can hear, or move up to the very first spot, application 19-25 of Patrick Aldridge.
I'll second it.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
All right, well then, thank you, and appreciate everyone else indulging him. So we'll listen to the application 19, which one is it?
25.
25, yes.
Kevin, we had to knock off the minutes of the last meeting first.
Oh, it's missing on item 3 here.
Do you want to come back to that, Bruce? Or,
Fine with me.
That's Piper. Which do you want to do?
All right, well, let's do the minutes first. You have any comments on the minutes, Bruce?
Actually, I do. Line 54. This has to do with the proposed, wait a minute. Oh.
Were you concerned that you and I agreed?
No, I was looking at the minutes of a meeting that occurred in 2018. On line 54, though, in the middle, there's a phrase that starts, it refers to concerns over the sign plan not meeting standards. And the issue that I wanted to point out is it's not the sign plan. The concerns were about the sign. There was
There
no
was no
plan
plan.
ever presented, which was another concern that's not mentioned. So I would say, to keep it simple, if we just delete the word plan, it's sufficient to just say concerns over the sign. And I think that'll
Okay.
carry an adequate message. Then, on line 67, the sentence ends, and if you could take a moment and look at that sentence. My concern is that it doesn't have any indication that the applicant agreed to the tabling of their application so that they could confer with the planning director to try to produce a more compliant submittal. So I was thinking that if we added to the sentence just the words, "and the applicant agreed," that covers the point I'm trying to raise, that they agreed to the working with the planning director on a more compliant submittal.
Okay,
And those are my
somewhat in
comments.
64, but we never said that they agreed.
Right.
All right, and so we got 2 changes. Anybody else? Motion for approval,
make a motion to approve
the changes?
Yeah, changes.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good. Now, we're off beat. You went back, sat down again. Application 1925 of Patrick Aldridge, agent, Town of Simsbury, owner, for a site plan amendment for construction of an 11-by-7 sun shelter at the Gifts of Love Farm, community farm on the property located at 69 Walcott Road. I thank you.
Hello, my name is Patrick Aldridge. I'm a Life Scout from Troop 175 in Simsbury, and I'm working on my Eagle Scout project at the Gifts of Love Farm in Simsbury. The project will be an 11-by-15-foot structure about 8 feet tall and will provide a shaded area where campers can still learn outside and stay cool. I have chosen this project because I wanted to be able to help the younger members of our community who attend camp there in the summer learn about the farm in an outdoor environment. This way, they can get a better experience learning about plants and their environment outside instead of inside the classroom while staying cool.
How'd you come up with this?
I was friends with Johnny. She like directs the camp there in the summer, so I just asked if she needed any projects, and
Great.
the drawing we have isn't real clear. So can you explain the materials,
It's
and is it enclosed at all?
it's just 4 posts with a roof on top,
Okay, and your roof is made of?
wood, and then it would be like shingles and stuff on top.
Asphalt shingles, you're thinking?
Yeah.
And the location?
It's it should be on there. It's like it's to
In
the
front of
right.
the greenhouse to the
Yeah.
north.
Yeah, okay.
My son built a loafing shed in the field, the animal field out there for his Eagle project.
I see a trend here.
Kevin, do you have staff memo that has the little yellow
Yeah.
blob on it?
I handed it to him. You can give him yours too.
Yeah, plus the digital version.
No. I'll use this one. Okay, anybody else have questions for the applicant?
I don't have questions, but I wanted to congratulate you. I think you got a good plan there, and I think
Thank
it's
you.
going to be a valuable addition to the program.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay, you ready for a motion?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve application 1925 of Patrick Aldrich, agent, Town of Simsbury, owner for a site plan amendment for the construction of an 11 by 15 sun shelter at Gifts of Love Farm, community farm on the property located at 69 Wolcott Road. The site plan amendment is subject to the following conditions of approval. 1, an administrative zoning compliance review application is required for the construction of the sun shelter. And 2, any modifications to these plans must be brought in front of the zoning commission for their approval.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You got approval. Thank you.
You're
Okay.
all set if you want to give other things to do tonight.
All right, the next item is a public hearing, and we welcome all of you here. I'm sure you want to speak. So what I might suggest, because there are a lot of you, is that we try to limit this so that we'll give you 2 minutes initially. And if we ask that you not repeat, you can get up and, I want everyone to speak. We're not going to cut back anybody's ability to speak, but you're welcome to get up and say what you feel, and particularly people that don't like addressing public hearings, they're a little shy about it. You can just get up, state your name, address, and everyone will need you to do that. And that, you're for or against, whatever you want to say, and that would be fine, because we did get written comments from a lot of people. And you're welcome to do that, or you can just say, I agree with, everything that's been said, so you can keep it short, so that, introduce new material, and you don't necessarily need to be redundant, okay? And then we'll all get home tonight, all right, in addition to a scout. All right, do we have the applicant here?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Charles Houlihan, 2 Somerset Lane, Simsbury, representing the applicant. And we would like to begin with a statement by Mrs. Jacqueline Roberts to address the application.
Good evening. My name's Jacqueline Roberts. I live at 45 Old Farms Road with my husband, Michael. First, I wanted to start by addressing some of the issues that have been brought to the town in the past. So last June, we had a wedding at our house that was reported to the town as an event we were running, but actually, it was my sister's wedding. We had bought the house, fixed up the farmhouse, done a lot of nice improvements, and we were super excited to have a small backyard wedding. 25 people, little kids running around, like not a big deal, just a simple wedding. We did have a small tent, and we had the music turned down at like 9:30, and we had little kids there, so it wasn't a big event. But it turned out to be a beautiful day. We thought it was gonna rain, but it was great. So, I wanted to make it clear that we had never rented our house to use it as an event venue, and understand that it is not something we are permitted to do going forward. We did have an incident in the early fall where we were told there would be a group of 15 people attending our house, or staying at our house, and that turned into 75 and a late night party. This is something we don't want to happen, not only for our neighbors, but also ourselves. We have put a lot of time and effort and love into our house. We wanted to make it a beautiful place, keep restoring it. And we were heartbroken to see that what we came home to. So we immediately met with the neighbors and assured them that this would never happen again. We took the listing down. That this was a mistake on our part, and the booking process was rushed, and we shouldn't have allowed that. So it was a big learning experience for us, and again, we were very upset about it. So after discussing our options with the town, we believe that the B&B model would be the best fit for our house. There are currently 3 other B&Bs in town that have a similar setup to our property to date, and there have been no issues reported. We will be on site for all bookings, and this will ensure that there will be no noise or parking issues going forward. So, thank you.
And I'd like to discuss the particulars of the application. The applicant seeks to have an occasional bed and breakfast at their property. It does not require any improvements to the building, doesn't change the footprint, doesn't change the look. The application follows the well-worn path of other bed and breakfasts in town. There are 3 others, as Jacqueline said. There's never been an incident with any of them. The other 3 are also located in residential zones. They're all managed by people on site, which this will be. There are no employees. There are no materials stored outdoors. There's no signage. The residential character of the property does not change. And particularly, no events will be held. This application satisfies the zoning code, and it's consistent with the prior approvals by the zoning commission. When we look at 3 of these bed and breakfasts in towns, we see that the bed and breakfast opportunity creates an economic incentive and ability to rehabilitate and preserve distinctive buildings of character in our town. The Linden House that I'm most familiar with, when they sold it, it was a 3-story building, and when it rained, the water leaked on the first floor. It was in terrible condition. And the Linden House had been a private residence. It was restored, and the bed and breakfast has supported that effort of restoration. The same thing happened when the old Glover estate on Hartford Road was rehabbed. It needed a lot of improvements, and it became a bed and breakfast, and that was restored. This property likewise needed a fair amount of renovation when the Roberts bought it. They have restored it. The approval of bed and breakfast is part and parcel of renovating and maintaining and preserving the character of key buildings in our community. Much of the opposition has come out of what are said to be 3 incidents, but in fact, really there's only one. The wedding that Ms. Roberts talked about was for her sister. Her sister lived on the property. There's an approved accessory apartment in the building. And it was a family wedding. Everybody who's here, everybody who has a home in Simsbury is entitled to hold a family wedding. There's no prohibition in the zoning code against holding a wedding on your own property. And there were no police reports on that wedding, but it did start complaints. And the complaints began under the misinterpretation that somehow this was a Airbnb event. It was not. It was a family event. It was entirely appropriate. Then there was some character. An intoxicated young man looking for a party in the neighborhood. Not at our house, somewhere in the neighborhood. He couldn't find it. Went and sat in a chair in someone's backyard. The resident, understandably, was unnerved, called the police. The police drove him home. He could never find his party, and there was no sounds of parties, according to the police officer. At the end of the day, that had nothing to do with our property, but it is part of the discussion and scuttlebutt in town. The third item is an item that understandably distressed the neighborhood, distressed the Roberts as well. They thought it was going to be a limited party, turned out to be much larger. It involved parking across the street. It had, it was just noise. And it was not what had been represented to the Robards to be. And their mistake is that they were not on site. They did not stay on the property at that time. And the lessons learned. That's not a way that it should happen. The problem that they had was not only the upset with the neighbors, but there was damage to their house. That's not a desirable outcome from anybody's standpoint. And so the application addresses this. Number one, there will be no events. Number two, the Robards will always be on site in the accessory apartment so that they can be there to intervene if it's noisy, if it's disruptive, if it doesn't go according to plan. And that really kind of is the essence of this. One of the interesting things in the package that the zoning officials put together is that the police went to this party late in the day, around midnight, a little before, a little bit after, found no noise coming. Still doesn't mean that it was appropriate, that was what was expected, but it was a one-off event, never to be repeated. And so on our application, we address what went wrong there. We make sure there's on-site supervision. There's a limit to 6 guests. We have sufficient parking for 6 guests, in addition to the 2 owners. There are 8 parking spaces. So that the parking is not going to extend into the neighborhood. All of the issues that were highlighted by that October party have been addressed and I think resolved in the application. And so we would ask that the commission approve this application, approve it on the basis that it makes sense and it's consistent with the other 3 approvals of bed and breakfast, recognition that character buildings deserve some commercial aspect occasionally to support and preserve those buildings, and that that this will not alter or impact the character of the neighborhood. And so we would ask that it be approved, and may have some comments after others have spoken.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this? Guess it's you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Brian Smith. I'm an attorney with Robinson & Cole at 280 Trumbull Street in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm here representing a group of neighbors who live at 5 Gates Farm. And I have a letter. It'll probably take me more than 2 minutes. I can read the letter. There's been some new information since I wrote the letter that I've just learned, but actually it enhances the reason that we're going to be speaking in opposition to this application tonight. I'm going to hand a copy of the letter to Mr. Pavoyan, and I have copies for the commission. If you want me to read it, the whole thing out loud, I'm happy to do that, or I can summarize it.
You can pass it out and summarize it.
Okay, that's fine.
I suspect, just to warn you, that we probably will take all this information in, but not vote tonight, because we have a big package to read. This adds to the big package. And so, just in order to consider everybody, just in case you were expecting a vote tonight, that probably won't happen.
Mr. Chairman, should I give the original to? So-
The clerk.
So just for the record, and some of these individuals wish to speak briefly as well because they have personal information that I obviously do not have, but I represent James DeVivo, Kelly DeVivo, Peter Heron, Carrie Heron, James Yablecki, Kay Yablecki, Thomas Finn, Tara Finn, Timothy Zeilman, and Corinne Zeilman, all residents of Five Gates Farm in Simsbury. And we're speaking in opposition for a couple of specific reasons, some that have been articulated by Attorney Houlihan, including that October event. But more to the point is that this use is actually no longer an allowed use, even despite the fact that I was just handed the memorandum by staff saying there are 3 other bed and breakfasts in the R40 zone. And how is that the case? Well, those 3 bed and breakfasts were all approved prior to December of 2011. And it's listed actually in the staff report exactly when they were approved. For example, the newest one is 444 Bushy Hill Road, which was approved on October 17th, 2011. And then 288, 290 Hop Meadow in 5/20/1996, and 100 Hartford Road on 1/31/1994. My point is this, is that there is no definition of a short-term rental bed and breakfast in the zoning regulations. What the applicant is relying on is Section 7C1, which is a home occupation use. And that's what was utilized back with those other 3. And that made sense at the time. But after that, December 19th of 2011, this commission changed its regulations and adopted the regulation defining a boarding house, which reads, any dwelling in which at least 3 persons, but less than 12 persons are housed or lodged for hire or otherwise without separate kitchen facilities, with or without meals. If 12 or more persons are housed or lodged, such building shall be considered a hotel or a motel. And that's precisely what is being proposed here, is something less than a hotel or a motel. They're proposing 6 guests, and it's for hire, and it falls into the category of a boarding house. So that's certainly not a home occupation. And in Article 6 of your regulations, in subsection F, it says that boarding houses are expressly prohibited unless expressly permitted. And so this application is not one for a boarding house. If that's what they're really seeking, then they should have sought that as the application, not a home occupation. And to further elaborate on the point of the home occupation, you would look at Article 5, and no business is conducted on premises except by mail or telephone, and here you have the people right here. No pedestrian or automobile traffic other than normally generated by the residents is generated. I mean, if you have 6 new guests and several more cars, it seems to be more. And there no external evidence that the business is visible. They may qualify for that, but it depends on what's going on. The other concern that's in my letter, which I'm just going to summarize, is that the words 6 guests and visitors is utilized in the application and Mr. Houlihan's letter. On top of the other points that I've made, the words "and visitors" are of concern to us, because even if you were to allow 6 guests, an unknown amount of visitors is troubling. We just don't know how that would be handled, even assuming it was an allowed use. And also, we have made attempts, both some of the members of my group and myself, to reach the Farmington Valley Health District, and apparently, according to one of the members, they're not really aware of this application yet. I tried to reach the health director, who's not even in until tomorrow, so we don't have information that we can provide to you as to whether this is going to have issues with the septic system if you have 6 additional guests and visitors. So those are some of the concerns we have. One other piece of information that I would say that I did learn was that I had said, well, there's the cease and desist order that was issued in October that says to immediately cease use of your property as a short-term rental and event rental location as a violation. And I said, well, they're still advertising the farmhouse apartment as of today, which I had attached. According to staff, that they view as legal because it's the accessory apartment. I had no knowledge of that, but it seemed to me, plain reading of the cease and desist to me said, stop using your property for that. So we were concerned about that as well. But my main points are that this use is not an appropriate use in this instance. Boarding houses, for example, are more and more out of favor, even in cities such as Hartford and East Hartford that both had boarding houses. East Hartford used to have what they call shared housing. They've abolished that. Hartford, even in their west end and in the north end, they had in the N22 zone, they had boarding houses. They now prohibit those outright. So we're suggesting here, your definition that postdates all three bed and breakfasts says that this is not an allowed use unless you specially seek permission for it. And in this instance, we think it's not appropriate at this particular location. So those are my comments. I appreciate your listening to what we have to say. And some of my others people may join in coming up here. Thank you.
Just to clarify, in the 2 minutes, you can come back for another 2 minutes. It's just we want to get to everybody, okay? If you have that much to say. I'm not trying to cut you off. Anybody else want to speak? Hey, Jay.
Hi, my name is Jay DeVivo. I'm at 15 Gates Farm. Tom Finn, who's at 75 Gates Farm, is traveling out of state today. He asked that I represent him as well. I'm going to deviate from my prepared remarks a little bit to kind of get into some of the things that the applicant has brought up, specifically, kind of the parties that occurred. So in October, there were parties on the night of October 12th and the 13th. And the second night, there were at least 100 people. Their cars had spilled out of the property, and every inch of our cul-de-sac was filled with cars. They were arriving and leaving until 5 in the morning. We later learned that the colored lights that the renters had installed in the windows were put there to indicate which drugs were available for sale. People congregated in our street openly drinking and smoking pot in front of our homes. And when the police arrived, one officer said he had never seen anything like it in 11 years on the force. We were told that we were exposed because we called the police, and we were advised to sleep with our lights on, install security cameras, and otherwise upgrade our home security. So the next morning, obviously, there's trash, there's liquor bottles, there's marijuana bags. One of the guests drove across my neighbor's lawn on the way out at 5 in the morning. And now the owners are before this commission asking for special exception to run a bed and breakfast. And we would oppose this on 2 grounds. First, quite simply, we don't trust them. I told Mr. Roberts about that incident when the previous owner rented the house on Airbnb and they had a party. And it was a drunk guest that not only sat by our fire pit, but tried to enter our home. And we know this because our dogs went flying to the door. They tried to enter our home. They were most certainly associated with that party, as evidenced by the fact that other guests went up to the man at the corner when the police responded. So I told Mr. Roberts about that incident, and he assured me that would never happen again with him owning it, because he planned to hire private detectives to monitor the property when it was rented. Clearly, he didn't do that. On the day of the party in October, he claimed that the people at his house were his friends, and he was at the home with them. The next day, he was forced to admit that he did not know them, and he was not on site. And after the party, he promised to take it down, and he'd never put it on Airbnb again. And the town of Simsbury sent a cease and desist order to prevent him from doing so. And as we sit here today, both 45 Old Farms Road and the other property he owns on Dogwood Lane are listed for rent on Airbnb. Now we have a tented wedding venue that is right down the street from our house behind St. Catherine's Church. And I could see this all happening again. You have wedding guests for the tent that are going to stay at the property, and what's going to happen, the after parties are going to come back to this bed and breakfast establishment. But even if none of the terrible things that occurred took place, we'd be here opposing it because we believe Simsbury is a special place. And special places don't allow businesses that cater to transient guests to operate in residential neighborhoods. When my wife and I moved from Los Angeles 16 years ago, we chose Simsbury. This is our second house in Simsbury. When we found it, we imagined that this was a place that one day our grandchildren were to come visit us. And there's no way we would have purchased a house across from any business that has strangers coming and going from the premises. Our neighborhood's residentially zoned, and it must remain so with no exceptions. And if for no other reason, it should be denied just as a matter of equity. All of the benefits of this bed and breakfast business would accrue to the owners of 45 Old Farms. The income from renting the property and the increase in the property value by turning a home into an income-generating property. Now, all of the costs, the unease of having strangers coming in and out of an abutting property, living across from noise, the decreased enjoyment from our own property, and more importantly, just as important, the decrease in property values from living across from a business are borne by us. And I'm wrapping up. I'm wrapping up. And so the last point I want to make, and this is something that a neighbor reminded me of, is that the only reason that the owners could even think about turning the property into a bed and breakfast is the land behind it. The land behind Old Farms, 44 Old Farms, is Tool Meadow Farms. And the development rights were purchased by the Simsbury Land Trust through contributions made by hundreds of Simsbury families, the town of Simsbury, and the owners of the farm itself. And that was done for the enjoyment of all. And it's unconscionable to us that one property owner, not involved in the conservation efforts, should profit from what was intended to be a public good. So the community is against it because, plain and simple, it's not fair. And we ask that you please do the right thing and decline the request for an exception. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Anybody else? Okay. It was a long 2 minutes.
What's that?
He had a long 2 minutes.
I gave him my time. Pete Herron, 5 Gates Farm, and I'm not going to reiterate everything that Jay said. I think he did a tremendous job. I do want to emphasize one thing, though. The party that weekend was out of control. I mean, the police report doesn't indicate that, but if you talk to anybody that was directly involved with it, it was so out of control that the police wouldn't even approach the house necessarily to break it up. I think they were so concerned with it. But that's the party, and let's just all hope that that never happens again. I just want to say this. So my wife and I and kids have lived in Simsbury for 26 years. We've lived on 5 Gates for going on 10 years. We specifically chose this town because it's more rural, it's quiet, there's less traffic, it's safe, and we really loved all of that in Simsbury. We looked at West Hartford. Well, we decided we don't want to live in a West Hartford kind of town. We want to live in Simsbury. We chose that house about 10 years ago because it was quiet, it was calm, it was rural, and it was exactly where we wanted to bring up a family. And we would not have bought that house had there been a business at 45 Old Farms. I know we wouldn't have. And so I think it's unfair, as Jay said, to now let a business come into a residential area when everybody bought their house in that area because there was no business there. Now, I'm pro-business. I love it. I hope Simsbury promotes more business. I think there's appropriate places for business. and the town can really reap the benefits of it, and then there's just places that it's not appropriate for. And I think this absolutely is an inappropriate place for a business, whether it be a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb. So my wife and I, Carrie Herron, are opposed to this exception, and we'd appreciate the zoning commission not approving the exception. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, you're up.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Hopkins, and I live at 40 Old Farms Road. And I'd just like to begin by saying that my wife grew up on Old Farms Road, and when we got the opportunity to move back there 7 years ago, we jumped at the chance because of the quiet rural neighborhood we were moving into. And I hate to keep beating a dead horse, but the party that was held there in October was absolutely horrendous. And I have to say, I have seen that kind of activity. When I lived in Danbury, a crack house down the street had exactly the same kind of activity going. I observed within a half-hour period at least 20 cars pulling in the driveway, pulling right back out, usually in groups 2, 3, 4. In the meantime, the other cars sat in the middle of Old Farms Road on a very bad turn where you can't see traffic coming, waited, and then the group formed up again and drove off. They may well say, oh, this will never, ever happen again. But unfortunately, they can't see the future. We can't see the future. What we have to deal with is what has happened there in the past. And with the past that has happened there, maybe these other B&Bs have had issues that nobody knows about. We don't know that. But I'm sure they are not in a rural area like we're talking here. And anything contributes to the traffic, which is already out of control on Old Farms Road, is just a disaster waiting to happen. And like I say, they can say all they want that it won't happen again. But what if it does? What if they sell it to somebody else, then turns around and goes above and beyond? Is there any control? Will there be any control to ensure that that doesn't happen? And if they only plan on having 6, why was it listed on Airbnb for sleeping 14 people? That puts it into a totally different category. And what really bothers me about this is the fact that, from my perspective, they appear to have purchased this residence with the full intent of having a commercial enterprise there to begin with. They hadn't even finished renovating it before it went on Airbnb for $850 a night, sleeping 14 people with extra fees for events. So it's obvious from the very beginning they planned on making money off this property. This is a residential area. If you want to make money on a property, go to a commercial area. Don't come into a rural area and change it for everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Regina Landsberg. I live on 278 Old Farms Road, which is about 2 miles up the road from the said property. And my observation, for one, is all the other bed and breakfasts are on roads that are a whole lot wider than Old Farms Road. I mean, we do have a bike path there, but it is so dangerous. It's narrow. And when people have tag sales and people park on Old Farms Road, I mean, it's just a disaster. And I don't really truly believe that the parking that the applicant has said is available is really adequate. And I just see people parking, again, on 5 Gates or on Old Farms Road. And I think it's an accident waiting to happen, especially if people late at night, we don't have any street lights or it's pretty dark and they're running across the road or walking across the road. I think it's a major safety issue in addition to what everybody else has discussed.
Anyone else? Okay.
So hi, I'm Tim Zielman. I live at 44 Old Farms Road, which puts me directly across the street from 45 and on the corner of 5 Gates and Old Farms. So I just want to make a couple points in opposition to the application for the exception. One is just a general skepticism about granting exceptions like this and allowing commercial businesses in residential neighborhoods from the beginning. I think it's useful to think about property rights like this from the point of view of the expectations of the buyer at the time when they bought the property. Certainly, my wife and I think our neighbors as well, bought the properties that we bought with the expectation of them being residential properties in a strictly residential neighborhood. At the same time, if you think of the applicants, at the time they bought their house, it was also a residential home in a residential neighborhood, and I think the reasonable expectations of the purchasers of the property and the owners of property should be given some credence. The other thing I wanted to just make a mention of too, in terms of the state of the property at 45 Old Farms when it was purchased, we've lived across the street for 20 years now. It has always been a family home. It's always been a well-maintained family home. I have no doubt the applicants put a lot of money into that, but it was not because the house was in any way run down at the time that they bought it. The final point I wanted to make is just that, if you ever were going to approve an exception like this, I think you would want to take into account the track record of the applicants. And you certainly heard a lot about that tonight, both in terms of their poor vetting and poor supervision of previous guests, as well as their disregard for town rules, which led to that cease and desist order. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Real quick, I promise. Darlene Hopkins, 40 Old Farms Road. My husband just talked a little bit. And my maiden name is Case. The barn and the farmhouse across the street from that was my great uncle's, his dairy farm. And I lived at 28 Old Farms Road for 29 years. Then I moved to Milford, and then to retire, we decided to come back to Simsbury just because of the family. I was the executor to my cousin who owned the house where we are today, and I decided to buy it because I love Simsbury. It's my life. The only issue I see that this lovely lady here mentioned is the traffic. Tim and Corey will tell you that they have 2 daughters who visit all the time with the neighbors behind us, and they cannot have the daughters walk on that road because of the traffic. It's so bad. She has to drive them there. We have a pond behind us, which right now, actually, you can't walk through it, the back of our property and something. The traffic is horrendous. When I grew up, it was just busy on Sundays. People were around. Orchid Farms was there, and we would, have big traffic there. But I noticed it has gotten worse. You cannot back out onto the road. If you come from their property, and you come up the driveway to Old Farms Road, if you look to the left, there's 5 gates. To the right, we are right across the street. It is dangerous. It's dangerous for us to come out of our road. And they've mentioned about coming out of their road. But if you go to look at it, you'll see that when they come out, they have to look to the right or the left. And I don't know how they can see anything coming out of there. So I am really worried about the traffic on our road. If anybody goes on our road, they usually go, instead of down Hot Meadow now, they come down Simsbury Road because it's faster. And as soon as they hit that corner, they step on it. I mean, we're talking really, really fast. Everybody goes around the town because, they don't want to go through the middle of town. So they decide to come on our road, which is windy, twisty, and it's horrible. So if you do anything, you might want to consider, the traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, in the back.
Despite the time, not representing anybody. Alan Lieberman, 91 Old Farms Road. We've lived at 91 Old Farms for 30 years now. And just want to also add my voice to the opposition here. You've heard most of the points, and I don't want to repeat it. But just a couple of things. First, just to echo the last point about traffic in particular, and trying to come out of that driveway. If they, in fact, are planning to have that many cars there, I'm very fearful that anybody would try to back out of that driveway, which I think is well near impossible. But coming out of that driveway anyway is a difficult thing, particularly during the bad weather months. You layer that on top of that. I just think that's, again, it's a recipe. We've had any one of a number of accidents on on our road over time. We've had people end up in our front yard, quite frankly. So it is a very difficult road, and all the people who live there can testify to that. Second, I do kind of want to object again to the notion that because there's 3 prior B&Bs, that somehow means that anybody who wishes to open up a B&B now should be able to do that. I think that has to be sort of evaluated on the facts and circumstances each time. Quite frankly, I would hope that that precedent stops. The legal reasons were given. I'm just not going to get into the legal side of it. But quite frankly, if you live in a residential area, there's an expectation that it will remain residential, and I think that's a reasonable expectation to have. Finally, those of you who know 91 Old Farms Road, the house is built initial structure was built in 1800, sort of diagonally across from Simsbury Farms. We know all too well how expensive it is to maintain an older house and keep it up. Yet at the end of the day, that's not an excuse to allow a commercial enterprise in that location. Those of us who buy those older homes know full well when we do the engineering report what's ultimately involved in maintaining those properties, and so I can't buy that as an excuse either. I think at the end of the day, this is a residential community. The people that live there, unlike a border, have certain expectations about their behavior because they know they're living there at that point, and that guides them in terms of ultimately how they use their property. And I just don't think that exists in the case of a commercial property. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Lori Boyko. I live at 15 Oakhurst Road in Simsbury, which is, for those of you that are not familiar, not anywhere near where this exists. It's down at the south end of Bushy Hill Road. It is actually much closer to the other B&B that's on Bushy Hill Road. I come to you as a 25-year resident of the town and a realtor for almost as long. I am currently still licensed, but I am now employed as a mortgage loan originator, so I'm still in the business, though I'm not actively selling real estate. I do still have inherent knowledge of the market, though. And initially, when this topic was brought up, I actually was somewhat in favor of the topic of short-term rentals. I could see how homeowners that might be moving out of state or moving to another town that were unable to sell their home might need to use a short-term rental. If they couldn't get a one-year lease on a property, maybe they needed to cover their mortgage, so they would get somebody in there for 3 or 6 months, a snowbird or something, until they could sell the property. The more I learned about this particular circumstance, the more concerned I became, because West Simsbury is a very unique area in town. There is a setting and a bucolic feeling in that area that is unique to Simsbury and the nature of the community in which we live. It is why the Land Trust felt it was so important to take on Toll Meadow Farm and not let that be developed. So there's an inherent characteristic in that area. And when we develop zoning regulations in a town, it's not done in a cavalier way. It's done with a lot of thought, a lot of time and effort by people like you that work for the town, and enormous sums of money spent on studies to determine what areas should be used for what types of properties. And that's been done here. A special exception application is by definition a unique set of circumstances that makes it a special case. It's an exception, but it's not meant for every property that wants to do something different in that zone to be able to do so. The attorney explained that the idea of renovating properties was the incentive to make these properties available as bed and breakfasts. This property doesn't need to be renovated. It was renovated. It was renovated when they bought it. There may have been some upgrades or changes, but the other properties that have been made into B&Bs were actually dilapidated properties that were falling into complete disrepair, and it was a huge incentive to the town for those owners to take on that financial burden of redoing those properties. The 3 bed and breakfasts that exists, one is Marywood. It's on Hartford Road, up across from Folly Farm. It sets way back from the road and is not really impacting any immediate residential properties. The Linden House is on Hot Meadow Street, right near the Chart House. It may be in a residential zone. I haven't studied it. I'm not an attorney, but it's sure much closer to a commercial area than this property is. And the property that Mr. Christopher owns on Bushy Hill Road is only a 2-bedroom B&B that his neighbors did not oppose except for a gentleman across the street that owned a daycare. And it is only a 2-bedroom, very occasionally used B&B that is never a B&B on a holiday weekend. I know the owners, they basically entertain guests from out of town and charge them a little bit of money, but it's not really a business enterprise going on there. I would submit to you that I read the guidelines under which the zoning commission is to consider special exceptions. They are tasked with looking at the need for the proposed use. I would suggest that we don't need another bed and breakfast. There are ample places within our own community and also in the surrounding towns where people can rent a room for the night at different hotels and the already existing B&Bs. You're to look at the existing and future characteristics of the neighborhood. I would tell you that I believe, as a realtor for 25 years, that changing that property into a B&B drastically changes the existing and the future characteristics of the neighborhood over in that area and directly impacts the neighbors. The traffic circulation has been addressed, but is another consideration. I believe somebody mentioned that the availability of water and adequate disposal of sewage has not been thoroughly vetted yet. And behind that property, I'm pretty sure there's some level of wetlands. So the concept of disposing septic that I think is original to the property with maybe a couple of repairs is very concerning, whether there will be sewage discharge into that area. And lastly, one of the considerations is supposed to be the safeguards to protect the adjacent properties from detriment. And without ever even assuming that what has already gone on would go on again, the zoning officer has been notified time and time again that things were going on the property that were already outside of the zoning ordinances. And the homeowners were basically told, there's nothing we can do. We don't have any recourse. So while you can say it could be a B&B and he won't hold any events, there's really no way to protect the surrounding homeowners should that occur again. Even the police were unable to do anything that night. So as a realtor, I believe this drastically impacts the value of the surrounding properties. And I just thought that it was not a good precedent to set throughout the town to put one more bed and breakfast in place in a clearly residential area, opening the door for others to follow and say, well, we should have a bed and breakfast too. Thank you for your consideration.
Anybody else? Don't be shy.
Good evening. My name is Matt Taylor, resident at 83 Old Farms Road, and I'd just like to say that we oppose the special application and support all the statements made by all the other residents in the area opposing it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelly DeVivo, and I live at 1 Gates Farm. I live within 100 feet of the home that the application is for, 45 Old Farms. I want to go on record and say that I am against this for the safety of my family. The home sits at the school, public school bus stop. There was an incident where my son got off the bus, came into my yard, and a renter also came into my yard and asked my son, who was 11, where the closest playground was. He was looking for Simsbury Farms. I happened to see this out of my window and saw a strange man talking to my child, asking for directions. I went out and I explained where it was. He told me he was renting, and, I certainly had the talk with my son, please don't speak to strangers, even if they come onto our property. You do not know them. It left me very uneasy. There was not one, but two crazy parties that could have been in a movie. I won't go into that again. We were up till 5 in the morning. Just having my children, my two boys, listen to a police officer telling my husband and I that because we called the police, we were exposed. We needed additional security. We needed video security. And, it was something that no parent wants to explain to their children, that this safe, bucolic community that we chose, we moved from Los Angeles to move to, I'm a Connecticut native, but to move to Simsbury specifically for the schools and the community. And we lived 10 years on the other side of town, and now 6 years at 5 Gates Farm. I would never, ever have purchased my home within 100 feet of a business, specifically a business that's transient in nature, with strangers coming and going anytime. Yes, the applicant claims to only have a certain number of people, but there was an Airbnb listing that claimed the home sleeps 14. Who is to say that the house won't continue to sleep 14? I just find it extremely unfair that one person can buy a home in a residential setting and propose to change that into a business within 100 feet of me and my children, and the people who've lived in this area for many, many, many years, longer than I have. We love Simsbury. This is why we chose to live here. So I ask, with respect, please do not choose to change the status of this property from residential to allow for the B&B. Thank you.
Real quick, my husband just pulled up the Simsbury, Town of Simsbury website, and the wetlands are actually right across the street from us, and what is like right next to the house, the barn, whatever, right in front of us, it is wetlands. So you might want to check that out.
Anybody else? No? Okay, Jim.
I'd like to go through a number of objections that were made and respond to them if I could. The zoning commission did rewrite the zoning code, I guess 2011, and at that time, the 3 bed and breakfasts already existed. And the commission found no reason to change that language, had no reason to consider that the bed and breakfast designation was improper in any respect. It remained unchanged. The boarding house exception just doesn't really apply here. It talks about not having separate kitchen facilities, but in fact, there are separate. The house has its own kitchen facility, and then they'll be in the accessory apartment. They have their own facility. But I think the fact that the zoning commission didn't tinker, didn't address this, is based on the experience it had with the other 3 bed and breakfasts, is significant. You need to ask, who are these people that generally are going to come in here? Generally, it's going to be some family connection to the community. And that tends to be the kind of guests that they attract. The one party being entirely different. And a lot of information has been put out that really is not particular to the application. For instance, Mr. DeVivo was talking about a bad experience that he had with the previous owners, the Glicks. Well, we can't answer that. That wasn't our property then, and whatever happened under the Glicks ownership happened. But it does not relate to our particular application. There's also it also said, well, you know, an Airbnb, it's out there. That was not for the entire house. That was for the accessory apartment, which was reviewed by the planning department and approved. You can have 30-day rentals of your property, and that's been done. That's how it was advertised, and that's an appropriate use. It was not entered into without submitting it and getting approval from the zoning enforcement officer, given the history that's happened. And if they're there and they're living in their house, I'm not sure that a comparison to a crack house isn't quite the situation that we have. We talk about the history of this property, and that it was a residential property. True, but it was also a farming property. And when Dunny Barney owned this house, he ended up having approval for all sorts of farm animals, as had been historically maintained there over the course of time. And he had horses at that particular time. When he first put the apartment together, the accessory apartment, he ran it as an art studio. It was, you know, a commercial enterprise of sorts at that time. So the history of this property is not static. And they talk about, well, there were old ads that said, sleep 14, bring everybody. But let's focus on the contours of the application. And the contours of the application are developed out of the experience that they've had. 6 people is what they're asking to stay there. Not 14, not some other number, 6 people. With sufficient parking on site for the guests that are there. The whole purpose of a special exception is to create appropriate controls for the use of property in a zone like this. And that is what we've tried to do. That is what the other bed and breakfasts offered and was approved. And we're trying to follow the existing standards that the Zoning Commission has consistently applied over the course of the last 25 years. Occasionally items get put out and said, well, what about this? What about safety? Well, we know, we're all familiar with Old Farms Road. We haven't heard of any accidents happening at that location. People have lived and gone in and out of that property for quite a long period of time. When we filed the application, we're required to circulate it among various town agencies. We submitted it to the Water Pollution Control Authority. One of the speakers said, well, you know, the sewer hasn't passed. Well, in fact, that's incorrect. The Water Pollution Control Authority has approved the application, finding that there's no problem. Farmington Valley Health District received the application. We haven't heard from them yet. Obviously, we need to. But the sewerage is not a problem with having the additional people there. You know, ultimately, we're talking about the Zoning Commission considering an application and putting its imprimatur on what kind of controls are appropriate for there. We've said there will not be any change in the footprint. There are no employees, there's no external, all of the standards that the zoning commission tells us must be met for a special exception have been satisfied. It won't look any different from the outside. And it is not a constant, day in and day out situation. It is an occasional bed and breakfast because there's just not that heavy a demand for it. The application seeks to put the controls in large part, to give assurances to the neighborhood, to give assurance to the zoning commission and the town that this property will be run properly, appropriate, within a configuration that that doesn't tax the resources and that will not change the character of the neighborhood. If you think about having a backyard barbecue, you might often see 6 cars or more coming by. That happens time to time in a neighborhood. This does not unduly burden any of the facilities there. We think that the zoning commission should act in accordance with its practice, in accordance with its standards for approving special exceptions, in accordance with its design that the home occupation for bed and breakfast is an appropriate manner of construing the use. We would ask that you approve the application with the restrictions and the controls that are contained. Thank you.
Anybody else for another 2 minutes?
I don't think I need 2 minutes. I don't even know if I need to go over there, but I
You
just
need to
gotta
be-
react to one thing.
We watch you on TV, so you got it.
In the microphone.
So
Could be your big break.
this whole word occasional is real, what was it? I didn't, I'm just so focused
It
here.
could be
I-
your big break, I
No, I've
said.
had
We
too
get
many
thousands
big
of
breaks
watchers
already.
of these meetings, yeah.
This whole occasional thing,
And
you know, did you hear what he just said? It's not occasional because that fits in with the character of the neighborhood and the bucolic part of the neighborhood. What did he just say, why it was occasional? Because there's not enough demand right now. And if there's more demand, maybe it doesn't become occasional, right? That's just the kind of stuff we're talking about, right? Is 6 really 6? What are visitors? How many cars are going to be on the property? What is occasional? Look, I'm sympathetic to you guys. You bought a house, you put too much money in it. I'm really sympathetic to you guys, I am. But that doesn't change our neighborhood, honestly. And again, I just had to react to that. And I ask you again to not accept this special acceptance. I don't think it's fair to the community at all. And I think it, as someone else said, it changes the look and the feel of our little community. And we think it's totally unfair to do that to all of us, to appease one person, which, oh, by the way, it's an exception to a zoning regulation, not a right. So I wanted to say that. And thank you, television, wherever you are.
Yep, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Brian Smith, Robinson, Nicole, representing the neighbors. Just, I want to focus on the legal points there, obviously focusing on the factual points, but Attorney Houlihan made the statement, which is, I would, with all due respect, a little bit upside down and backwards about the question of the use, because when you put in the definition of boarding houses, which happens to fit exactly what they're proposing, and that's subsequent to what the bed and breakfasts that you have in town, that makes those legally non-conforming. They're fine. You don't need to tinker with those because no one's objecting to those. They're already there. It's going forward, like today, that we are concerned about looking at the regulations. And when you say separate facilities, separate kitchen facilities, a boarding house or a rooming house or even a hotel, you look at the individual rooms. Each bedroom doesn't have its own kitchen. It's not an apartment building. It's a bunch of rooms and a kitchen. And maybe they have an accessory apartment that also has a kitchen, but it still meets the definition of what we would actually call a boarding house. Because it has a bunch of bedrooms and one shared location for kitchen. And this commission put that regulation in place. That, I don't know how you get around that. He would actually need to make an application for that use, and then we could have a discussion about that. What he's doing, what the applicant is doing here is no longer something that's legally viable. And for all the other point that I would make is that Article 7, Section 10, which has all the standards for special exceptions, which others have referred to, that's the burden is on the applicant to prove to your satisfaction the need for this use at this location. And that's in 10A. In 10B, it says, what's the existing and future character of the neighborhood going to be? You've heard what the neighbors and the owners that I represent are fearful of the future of this neighborhood's going to be. The 10E is a circulation on the existing streets. And 10H is whether there are adequate safeguards to protect adjacent property and neighbors in general from detriment. We respectfully submit that all those standards have not been met. And therefore, for those reasons, as well as the others that you've heard all tonight, we ask that you turn this application down. Thanks.
Okay. You're back.
I just want to say that in disagreement, I guess, with what's been said, this property and the driveway and the parking is not this. I'm not familiar with the other two boarding houses, but I know the Linden House. That parking lot, that whole area, it's flat. It's absolutely pancake flat. And there's a goodly amount of parking spaces at that particular location. If you look at 45 Old Farms Road, the driveway goes down. I cannot even imagine how they can even get 8 cars in there, but also turning around is got to be an issue. And I really, again, just feel that this is just such a safety issue with all the problems that go on Old Farms. And I think it's definitely different from the other location, and I think that really needs to be taken into account here. Again, coming back to the safety issue.
Could you repeat your name again?
Regina Landsberg, at 278 Old Farms Road.
Okay. Yep.
Jacqueline Roberts, 45 Old Farms. I think a lot of the concerns about the party was obviously not good. Believe me, I would never want that to happen in my house. So what I want to just reinstate is that this exception is for us to be on site on the property. So that's an important piece because everyone keeps saying, what if this happens again? But if we are there, it won't happen again. So that's an important piece because I think that keeps coming up, and my husband and I take pride in this home, and we don't want anything to happen to it. And, we want the neighborhood to stay as bucolic and beautiful as why we chose to come there. There has been a lot of renovations that still need to occur on the house. That's not a reason why we want to rent it, but it is something that's helping us make this home better. I mean, the wood is deteriorated. There's a lot of the costs are astronomical, and it actually is a lot more than we thought it was going to be when we purchased the house. And we want to continue to invest in the property. But again, this is for on-site. We're going to be on-site, and we do not want any of these things to ever occur. So I'm sorry that this had happened, but I assure you it will never happen again.
Have you taken any courses or classes in being an innkeeper?
Have I taken?
Any courses or classes or done any research in being an innkeeper? Just curious.
Yeah. No, but I've gone to many inns and I've stayed at many places. I've traveled a lot, and, it's one of Mick's really good friends. His best friend has one of the top B&Bs in Nova Scotia. And, we talk to him frequently about what he does and how he handles things, and so, yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, just for clarification, the 4-bedroom is the home,
Yes.
not including the apartment?
Not including the
And
apartment.
how many bedrooms in the apartment?
It's one bedroom. It's like a lofted space.
Yeah, it's a special exception that we put in place
Yeah, I
not too
know,
long
right.
ago with the Glicks, and then they put the house on the market.
Any other questions?
Anybody else? Lori, can you repeat your name?
My name's Lori Boyko. I live at 15 Oakhurst Road. I just wanted to say one more quick thing, because as I'm listening, it sounds like it's one neighbor wants something and other neighbors don't want something else. And I see this as a much bigger issue that affects the town in general and not just the immediate neighbors. The property is on the road that is the direct access to Simsbury Farms. And the neighbors that are expressing the topography of the driveway and the difficulty, particularly in someone that's not familiar with the property. When you own a house and you have a tricky driveway, you kind of learn the nuances of the driveway and how to wait for the traffic and to notice when the traffic's coming. And I think when you're not familiar with a property, that's a little harder to do. And we're talking about a street where people go down regularly, kids are biking down that street, parents are taking their kids back and forth to the pool or the tennis or the golf course, and that is a traffic issue. It's not just an issue between the immediate neighbors and the property that wants to be a B&B. It really does affect the rest of the community when they're traversing that road. So I just don't want it to kind of get so micro that it's one against the other, because there's a bigger picture here. Thank you.
One just very
And
short.
repeat your name.
Tim Zielman, 44 Old Farms Road. And that's just on the question of traffic and the statement that there were no accidents in this corner of the road. And the attorney for the applicants, I'm sure, had no way of knowing this, but in our experience, there have been at least two relatively serious accidents at that corner. One was a rollover actually up on the lawn of 44 Old Farms Road, and then a couple of years ago, a car up well into the lawn at 1-5 Gates. I believe it was before the DeVivos bought the property. Somebody who didn't during the night couldn't make the turn, ended up in the middle of the lawn. So occasionally, every few years or so, there's an accident at that corner.
Are we done? Go on. Okay. Motion to close the public hearing?
Kevin, I think there's good reason to consider keeping this public hearing open. We received a lot of material tonight, not just comments, but written material that I think deserve our thoughtful consideration. And we may end up with questions that we would like to ask to the submitters. And I think it would be valuable to let the public hearing stay open until next week, or the next meeting, which would be June 3rd, June 6th, June 3rd, I think, whatever it is. But there's no advantage to us to close the public hearing unless there's a strong feeling here
Gives
that
a
we're ready
chance
to
to
make a
talk to
decision
the
tonight.
two attorneys if they want to.
Right, and there's also the possibility there's somebody that is traveling tonight who would have liked to have been here, who could offer some insight that might be the light bulb that illuminates all of us. So, again, I would offer.
Okay with that?
I
Everybody?
agree with Bruce.
Okay.
I offer a motion that we continue this.
Motion to
second it.
continue the public hearing then. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Yes.
Yes.
Yep. You get to do this all over again.
Do you know what date it is? June. Sounds good to me.
3rd, June 3rd.
June 3rd.
Same place.
Same time,
Same TV.
same TV.
It's people following it.
Podcast.
All right, next application here, next order of piece of business. Where are we?
Sorry, we're out here.
Oh, come on, this is exciting. You don't want to leave. All right, application 1921, we have a public hearing, so there's nothing to do tonight. Public hearing is scheduled for 6:03, so we have, more people will be attending that one. Application 1922,
We're tabling.
well, we need to take action just to,
Oh,
Actually, Mr. Chairman, you still have the public
Just
hearing
continue?
open, so you.
Just
don't-
continue.
There's no action on this.
Okay.
This item.
No action needs to be taken. Application 1923. This is the applicant requested that the application be tabled to our next meeting. Do we actually need to table it ourselves, or?
You should
Okay.
take action.
So we need a motion here to
Mr. Chairman, I'll
table
make a
this.
motion to table application 1923
And 24?
And 24.
and 24.
Sorry, I think.
No, thank you.
Okay.
It's a good pickup.
Second.
Well, they're two different applications, but okay. But
Yeah.
You can
second?
do it in both, in one match.
All right.
It's the same.
All in favor?
Second,
Okay.
aye.
Okay. Donna was the
Yeah,
second, yeah.
sorry.
We did 25.
Yep.
26. Anybody here for
This is
that?
Antonio's?
Yeah,
Yeah, Steve's here, hold on.
he was down the hall. You should be.
Oh, I can't,
They were all here speaking about your application.
there's like a few others in front of us. Sorry about that.
All right, so application, which one is it?
1926.
1926 of Christopher Millard, agent, Five Ants LLC, owner for site plan amendment for facade improvements in addition to existing building on the property located at 1185 Hot Meadow Street.
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm Chris Millard from Phase Zero Design. Here to present Antonio's facade. There's three drawings that I have here. Basically, the first one, which shows the existing conditions, front facade, floor plan. Second one is the proposed facade and floor plan, and then the third drawing is the rendering, which I think the rendering pretty much tells the story. But I'll give a quick description of what the proposed applicant, Steve Antonio, is looking to do with the building. Basically, right now, interior, there's a counter in here. It has a very tight takeout area. The thought is to expand that. So this exterior wall that kind of goes across the front of the building, Steve's looking to push that forward. By pushing it forward, it means that the vestibule is going to come out, come forward about 5-6 feet. And same with this area, you're going to create a little nook in that area to develop the takeout space. So since we're doing this work, there's some other work too along the facade where hoops and hops is noted, where we're going to spruce that up as well. So I kind of jump to the next page. So you can see here, this new facade, the existing facade was back about 6 feet. New entry vestibule, the new area for the takeout. Basically what we're doing with the takeout area is we're extending the hoops and hops facade further towards the left, towards the entrance. So basically this roof line will continue. And then in front of the takeout area, we're creating a little bit of a bay window, again, just to create more space for the takeout area and also to break up the facade so it's not a long, continuous, straight facade. The A-frame structure, which I guess is over the existing door, we're pulling that forward. In doing so, we're able to basically change the facade, change the appearance a little bit, where we're adding some new materials to it. The canopy that's kind of long and linear and flat, we're reducing the length of that, increasing the height, and relocating the signage that used to be on the A-frame to the front of the canopy, so it's more recognizable and more understanding as the main entrance. Like I said, we're changing some materials. This is the side elevation. You can see we're bringing it forward that 5 feet. And then kind of the last thing that we're doing is adding the horse statue, which is currently on the roof down here to the top of the building. So the exterior renderings, again, as I mentioned, hoops and hops, we're refreshing that facade. There's vinyl siding there now. Pulling that siding off, adding some PVC panels and trim. at painting those, replacing the windows, adding a new door into that facade so that way this outside area terrace can be used as outdoor dining. One thing I didn't mention is there's an existing 3-foot tall brick wall that's there now. The brick wall would be taken down and new iron fence put up in its place. So that way it's more pedestrian feel, of course, for
It's a
outside
nice
dining.
outdoor area. It looks really nice.
Which facility will use that? Yeah, both? You can speak.
He actually by statute can't speak because he serves on the zoning board of appeals.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
So
So
will
he
that
gets
be,
linked.
will that go to both?
That's
Yes.
Any questions?
Will that go to both the restaurant and the bar?
Yes, as I understand. The bar is obviously directly behind that wall. There is seating in there that's outside of that bar.
Yeah.
It's kind of a transition space, but as I
Yeah, I
understand
thought part of the
it,
restaurant was
Yeah,
there.
you can use it as the restaurant.
Yeah.
Or-
it
okay.
could be either. And then as I mentioned,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the signage or the canopy, we reduced the length. There used to be 4 columns across the front and it created a lot of shade. By pulling that forward, it basically reduced the depth of that canopy so the entry isn't in as much shade as it used to be. And then, of course, we reduced the length too. So before the entrance as it is today is very dark and kind of hard to spot underneath that awning.
Where the 3 windows are to the right of the A, those are all windows, right? There's no door in there.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's basically a bump out that we created a bay window for just more floor space inside. Because that's basically right behind that window is where the takeout area. So new entry door that gets pulled forward, has a vestibule inside. And once you enter that vestibule, the door is angled in such a way so you can go right to takeout or towards the restaurant.
What is the material underneath the Antonios here?
We have a stone material, which it's tough to tell right now, but it is the whole front of the A-frame with a wainscot, beadboard wainscot along the bottom. We have a little bit of beadboard at the top, at the peak of the A. And then inside is a balconette with a new louvered, basically a louvered window. It's not a window, it's just a faux louvered veneer.
And what stone is that? What design have you asked about it?
The stone, it would just be like a thin stone veneer.
And it's the gray color that you're showing?
Yeah, we actually did not present material colors to design review, final selection.
Could we get sort of a capsulized version of what did the design review board say? I haven't seen any report.
Design review, well, they reviewed it this evening. Design review board actually gave a favorable recommendation on this. They saw this application two weeks ago as a preliminary. It's been a month now. The main concern they had, over here on the board, there was some texture, some X's that were shown on these blank spaces on the canopy which had been removed. This treatment, they thought it was a appropriate treatment. It's a flagstone, sort of gray stone that was used for this. There was a concern about the color of this arch here on top, whether it could be a darker color versus the white. However, they still found to issue a favorable recommendation on this. A lot of it also having to do with updating these windows over here. If you recall, I mean, the existing windows are kind of a 1980s style construction. This will carry a pattern to the A-frame, which the tricky part with this A-frame and why the stone finish was chosen is that, you have this very awkward thing sitting there, and how do you dress it without removing it? And so this kind of makes it look better than versus having, the applicant looked at a solid treatment of this, looked at siding, and it was just the breaking up the texture with the stone is what really dressed it up. So.
And what is the material on the side of Antonio's there, where the kind of brown, that is?
We have it as a PVC material, so PVC paneling and trim. And then, of course, that receives paint.
Oh, so it's not the roof coming down?
There's roofs
No,
here.
but I meant the A-frame roof, it's not
Oh,
that
right,
material.
is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
That is the roof, right.
That's-
So right now,
well,
there's-
yeah, it actually
it keeps
continues
coming
all the way to
down.
the ground.
The roof material.
Oh, right here?
Yeah.
And we do have it as roof material.
Yeah, okay.
Which it is today.
Is that curb line that's, depicts the front edge of the structure and the concrete, is that the same curb line that's there today?
Yes, it is. There would be some modifications to it for handicap
Yeah.
ramp.
So there's this, the renovations that are described here have no implications for parking, traffic flow.
So this is the existing plan layout. You can see the curb line here. Basically pulling this facade forward and leaving that curb line in place, and still keeping sidewalk and circulation. Right now, there's a large sidewalk in front of the building.
Right.
So it's certainly unnecessarily sized. So we're just taking advantage of that sidewalk space. So microphone's behind me. So here you can see, basically, we're creating a handicap entrance here, and then there'll be a ramp on each side. I'm sorry, I believe the handicap entrance is here with a ramp up to the existing level.
Yeah, you could kind of see it from the other drawing with the color.
Yep. The rendering. That's right.
Okay, so that curve over the door is not actually a projection then?
Oh, this curve here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little misleading. That's in the same plane as the balconette. It's basically just a curved beam underneath it. So I think that was that was the only comment that we received from design review today, is they weren't sure about that color.
Yeah.
They mentioned, matching the color to the guardrail of the balconette.
They're all iron.
Or not having the curve? Was that an option?
They didn't ask for that.
There's a lot
Yeah,
going
what
on up
function does
there.
that curve?
With the door and the railing and the curve, I mean, it's kind of like,
Well, the whole front has a lot of stuff going on.
yeah, but it's even more now.
So that's at the same dimension, but what function does it serve?
It's a decorative element. Basically, the intent is to look like the support for the balconette.
Could you
It's just
remind
hard
me?
from here, yeah.
I saw the horse was described as relocated from somewhere.
Yeah, there's not a horse on top of the building now.
Right now, it's on.
It's not eye-catching, it doesn't seem to me. I've been driving by there and going in there for years, and I don't remember.
Can that horse be relocated? I don't.
You're asking the wrong person.
I think if Steve Antonio was in the room, maybe the horse should be relocated to a different place other than there. Just putting it out there. Like right next to
The
the.
horse is currently on top of the roof here, so it's being relocated to the
So
peak.
why can't it go right here?
Well, we did reduce the size of it.
Just something to consider.
Sure.
The Russian lead.
Yeah, we
Statue of Liberty's on the other side, so it's no competition over there.
Ideally where it is now is certainly a focal point. I do think putting it back down on a smaller roof would only make the building a little more cluttered. Just because, there is something going on in the background, you have the signage, and I'd hate to put the horse right in that same spot with the decorative element that we're trying to create on front of the A-frame facade.
I think that might be a better location. Just putting it out there.
That needs a dome, a blue dome, and then the horse on top of that, just like the Colt. Take this to a whole nother level.
There's a statue that, as you know, is currently on the site. As it comes forward, we're relocating it to the opposite side. You can see it here in this left. bottom right
That's
image.
good.
So the horse could be on the other side.
Exactly.
Or in the middle where the balcony
Yep.
thing is now.
Put the horse on the back.
There's a better home for it. You're the creative one.
Sure.
We're gonna task you with that.
All right, we got any more questions?
I think it'll be a nice change.
Do we have a staff report here?
We do.
This is what I have for that, hold on. This for this?
You're gonna need it for making a
No,
motion.
no, not me.
Well, you're the one that wants to move the horse.
Well, then we can't make it unless we have some other things. Does this have anything about the horse?
I was just gonna pass it over to you.
What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna
got it.
pass it to Donna, but you
Got
got
it.
the honors down
Yeah,
the agenda.
you got it.
All right, well, we can discuss the horse before we actually vote here. Do we want the horse on the top, or we want to find a different location for the horse?
I think there's a better home, which I said.
I like it where it is, actually.
Okay.
Just for the record, design review did not have any comments on the horse.
That's okay. They're under our purview,
Yeah.
so, sorry.
I
You
grew
guys
up
feel
in
about the
the,
horse?
I grew up in the coal building, so I used to stare at the one that's there once.
Personally,
upon a time.
I don't recognize it as
This is
having been
Simsbury,
part
though,
of the
okay? Like, can we
facade
rein it in a
before,
little?
but I don't object to it. It was kind of a surprise and, you know.
I don't like the balcony as much as I like the horse.
Personally, I would approve it the way it is. I mean, I don't feel it needs a change.
I think it's maybe the rendering too. The way it's up in the sky like that. Might be exaggerating.
Put a lightning rod on the top.
It is a lightning rod.
Yeah. Make it a unicorn. All right, we're going with it?
It's such a strong shape. The horse, I think, kind of helps accent, what's happening there architecturally.
But it is such a strong.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think you
Horse.
need to accent anymore,
Exaggerates.
and I think he knows this.
It's exaggerated, I mean, it really is.
Let's try.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Okay, we're going with the horse?
Let's lower the horse.
I'm in favor of them figuring out
Do we
maybe
have
another
any-
home for it.
Do we have any regulation that,
Height?
like, has
conform-
restrictions on height of horses?
If you consider it structure, it conforms to the building height for the the zoning district by, I think, 3 feet. So it's within.
Wouldn't it look better to have that on one side and then the Statue of Liberty on the other? And I'm not joking at this point.
You'd have, you'd have a lot going on. And also, the other issue is, if you put it on the side, you run potential of running into conflict with your ADA accessibility improvement that you're making to the entrance. Because you remember, the intent of the addition here is to provide a safer entrance to the facility and improve the waiting area. Of course, you can go to the floor plan.
So it could go where the balcony is, or it could go next to
Yeah, I would
Antonio's
sit it
sign.
right in where the balcony is, on the front
That
of
have
the
nothing to do with entry.
sign.
No, I'm sorry, I thought you meant down below that when I said the ADA accessibility.
Just giving you all the spots, all of the locations.
Yeah, I'd rather see it on the top of the parrot, the awning.
So the entrance for the ADA ramp is here, and then that is the ramp sloping up, so
Yeah, there's not enough room
certainly
there.
there is
No,
very
you can't do it
limited
there.
space in that area now that we've pulled the building forward.
Exactly what does the horse stand on? What is,
We're creating a platform since basically the front 5 feet of that structure is all new. So within that new A-frame structure, we're able to create some structural support and a platform for that to tie into.
but is it raised above the, I'm trying to see that.
No, it's not intended to be raised above, it's intended to be flat with the peak of
With the
the
peak.
A. Which I should say.
Yeah.
Do you think if you conferred with your client that maybe it could go above the Antonio sign? Still make a statement?
Possibly.
Okay.
If there is a place there?
I think there is. You know, I do think architecturally there is a lot happening there, and I hate to put it there, but, you know,
You can
it's
modify
certainly
that.
something
That
we
could
could-
go away.
Yeah, you can
And
modify
then the
that.
horse could fill the space,
And be your statement?
Right.
maybe. I would be
Well, I
okay
don't
with
know
that.
if we want to
So you want
let them confer, or, I mean, if they were looking for a vote, so.
In fairness to the applicant,
Mhm.
I think you should give him the chance to talk to his
Yeah. Yeah.
agent before you make
Sure.
a vote on this.
Do
'cause
they
this
want
is
to do that
This is a
today?
pretty big change compared to what he's requested of the
Do
commission.
you want us to table this? What's the best way to go?
Probably talk this evening and.
If you give him maybe 5 minutes, that he can talk to his client.
All
You
right.
you have a few items on the agenda left, so you can come back to this.
Okay, we will
Continue it or?
table it
Just to.
for later this evening?
Yeah,
Okay.
just give him 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Do we need a motion to table it, or?
Well, you want to make a motion?
We'll just come right back to it.
Okay.
It's not, you're not tabling to another, I tell you, if you were tabling to
Yeah.
the next meeting, then yes, take it, but he's just taking 5 minutes to talk to his agent.
Okay, next up is 1927, which has a public hearing scheduled for June 3rd. Wow, that's a busy meeting. For June 3rd, so no actions needed there. Next one, application 1928 of Mark Deming, agent, Town of Simsbury owner.
So, Mr. Chairman, this was an application file, it's in the center zone, you have that reg still in place,
Oh, we
the
gotta
public
wait.
informational sign has to be up for minimum 15 days after it's received by the commission, so you cannot act on this application tonight, you'd have to wait until the June 3rd meeting. Under the center code, this is that reg that we were discussing a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
Okay, so we can't take any action there, so then we are on to application 1929, and
This is also a public hearing for a special exception. You have one other public hearing. 1930 is also from the Performing Arts Center for the construction of permanent sound towers. It's not on your agenda just because it was forwarded to us, signed by the town manager after we filed the agenda. That will also be a public hearing because it's development in the floodplain. These are structures under the regs.
on June 3rd.
June
Thursday.
3rd. So you will have.
Marathon.
You'll have 5 public or is it 5 now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 public hearings, of which 2 may draw a large crowd. So staff will look at an alternative location just in case. And we'll get the word out through
Yeah, I was gonna say,
neighbors.
'cause I
Don't,
said on TV
yeah.
that it was gonna be here.
Yep. We will make sure that everyone knows we're someplace else if we do a road show.
Okay, so we got another public hearing, so no action there, and then we're just waiting.
For 1926?
Yes, do we have any correspondence? You want to update us on the
So-
regs you're going to send us tomorrow?
Yeah,
If you're lucky.
Robin can update.
So we do have regs actually that are ready just to go out for you guys to take a look at. It's just a revamp. The only reason why I didn't send it out to you for today was because I'm changing some cross-references that are in there just to make sure they're correct. So you guys are going, where's section 11,000? Because it doesn't exist anymore. I had changed it to one format and then my OCD kind of kicked in and I changed it to a different format. So those will be uploaded in Dropbox tomorrow and we'll just send you guys an email letting you know that it's up there for you to start taking a look at. There's some very minor changes in there. We're working on a sheet for you guys of what we potentially pulled out and what we've put in. Not much has been put in, I think, other than site plan applications and special exception application requirements. Other than that, we have a separate memo that's going to be coming to you guys just for informational purposes at the next meeting, not to be discussed because we have 5 public hearings, just of things we want to discuss with you to potentially add in and change. So be looking on the lookout for that email tomorrow with the new formatted regulations.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from?
When, I missed something though, when are we anticipating an initial discussion on that, those regulations? Not
I
the
would-
next meeting, sometime after that?
I would say the second meeting in June.
Second meeting in June.
We'd potentially like to get to a point where maybe like our second meeting in July,
We're at a
scheduling a
public hearing.
public hearing or having a public hearing.
Yeah. We're also awaiting from Glenn Chalder to update the illustrations in your regs, which I spoke to him this morning. He's working on finalizing. So as soon as we have that, because we retained the service of Glenn specifically to update illustrations. That was something that we said, looking at the existing regs and other towns' regulations, there's some options out there to clearly illustrate things such as, what does it mean to be a front yard versus a front yard setback, and a few other housekeeping items that we said, just from a day-to-day using the regulations, trying to explain it to someone, or worse, someone trying to access them online who emails and says, I have a question, I read the text, but this doesn't make sense. So we'll have that hopefully in the upcoming meetings from Glenn.
Let me go over the calendar then again. So second meeting in June would be our discussion of it before we go to public hearing in July?
Yes.
Okay.
So you'll have, so you basically will have a month
To read.
to read the new
And then-
regs.
Comment.
We'll have that cheat sheet of the
We'll
substantive
quiz
changes.
Bruce on the changes, because I know you're gonna know. No, it's good. It's good.
I might.
Or we'll hold back that list.
We'll
see
hold
if-
back the
we'll see
list
if
and
you-
get really
we'll-
complicated.
we'll-
I
we'll
like
show-
that idea.
We'll show you the stuff we're adding, but we won't show you the stuff we're subtracting.
That's right.
And I'll award a prize to who gets the most right of what we took
I'm gonna
out.
tell you, it's gonna be him. I'm pretty confident.
Bruce, we'll talk after the meeting. What do you want to win?
Anything else that you would like to update us on?
No. I know that the commission we had discussed really, tonight may not be the great night to talk about it, short-term rentals. We're waiting to hear from Attorney DiCrescenzo on a few questions we had on an ordinance. We've updated the group earlier. We have a kind of a structure of a ordinance for the subject. We could work a little more on that and see if we can get an answer from Bob, and then maybe at the next meeting, report to the commission for that. But we're waiting for his response.
So on that point, are you or Bob following the progress in the legislature of the pending bill?
It died in committee.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
And what have you done with affordable housing in the update?
In the reg update, we haven't changed anything.
Okay, so
your
it's still there.
Your special regulations that have the different zones that call for affordable housing is still in there. Those are discussion items that we have on a separate memo as far as, I know we had talked about the workforce housing overlay zone. We had talked about a distance from Route 10 at one point in time.
Yeah,
we want to make sure those things get incorporated in, so they're kind of bullet points of discussion to bring them back up, because we've talked about bits and pieces at different meetings,
Yep.
but not collectively.
yeah, that was one, as we were going over the last version, we went over like outstanding items between the two of us, and that was one thing. We discussed it as a commission. We never landed on what we were to do on locating the WAS in town. I think we talked about
Thought we
within
did. That
750
was
feet
what
of
we
Hot Meadow Street.
Yeah.
If that's what the commission wants, we'll put it in.
We just wanted to bring it back around
We just
and
wanted
get an
to circle
official.
back. Both of our notes, we still had that as an unresolved matter.
Because we did talk about it for quite a bit,
did.
so I do,
Quite a
yeah,
set-
I do
yeah.
want that to
And
land.
hence why we wanted to
Yeah.
bring it back to your radar.
Yeah.
So I think that's,
Although I think that the signage discussion from 2 weeks ago
Yeah.
was longer than the 700 and something feet discussion of the requirement of being on a hot meadow. I was amazed at how long you guys talked about the Drake Hill signage.
Yeah.
Watching
And
the
it's still
video.
We're
not
not done.
resolved.
Yeah.
When are we should discuss when we're gonna talk about that,
Are we part of the reg update, I would think?
you think?
Well,
We have to decide on it?
so,
Well,
so signage is a big, that's a broad discussion, just courtesy of the Connecticut Supreme Court and the US Supreme Court on two decisions
on what towns can and cannot regulate for signage. We're going to look into presenting a Reed versus Gilbert proof regulation. Basically, the way that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, they said that you can't regulate signage based on the user. You have to regulate by the location.
Makes
And
it very difficult to come up with regulations, but
It's-
I have some examples and,
You sent us something on that, right up on
Yes.
that? On that?
Yes, we can
And
give
it's
you.
interesting that the Supreme Court actually has dealt with signage.
And also in Connecticut,
important this is.
the Connecticut Supreme Court in the past 6 months issued an opinion that statute reads that towns only have the authority to regulate signs that advertise. So if,
however, there is legislation that did come out of committee that changes that.
we're waiting on
so
that, we're waiting on
Yeah.
that, stay tuned on that.
Stay
But-
tuned.
Yeah, so like, for example, the issue the issue, this one was there was a house in Milford, they paid a contractor to do renovations, they weren't pleased with the contractor's work, they decided to put billboards up, big plywood, and they were right on the beach.
Oh.
And saying, don't hire contractor XYZ. The town said, well, in a residential zoning district, you're only allowed a sign of 6 square feet. And the Connecticut Supreme Court said, well, the way the statute reads is you can only regulate a sign that's advertising a product, good, or service. This is expressing someone's opinion,
Yep.
therefore it's not advertisement. And the town has no rights to enforce any regulations.
Or for how long it was up or anything else? Okay.
You name it.
Okay.
So, and as
That was a
Robin said.
special, obviously.
But now there's
Yeah.
legislation
Yeah.
that looks like it's gonna get passed that
Okay.
fixes that issue. So
And that's not
kind of-
us anyway.
It deletes
No,
the
it's
word
not us anyway.
advertising
Yeah.
from statute.
We don't, as a practice in our office, go after any free speech signs.
Right.
We essentially say it's free speech, it's
Right.
protected, and we leave it alone.
Yep.
Because of these two court cases.
Yeah.
Really, the federal court case is the one that, we try to avoid contradicting.
I guess we'll probably have this discussion.
That may not be, just so you guys
Yeah.
are aware, as far as the sign regulations go, that may not, that's kind of a more in-depth research and vetting through the town attorney. That may not get addressed in this zoning regulation overhaul, because it's pretty consuming. It's a discussion of, do we just regulate by zone? Because that's the suggestion that's been made, so any sign in any zone can only be a certain size. There's a lot that's gonna go into that conversation,
So these regs will have our current.
these regs
It
will
will
most
have-
likely have our current.
This is
sign-
what's allowed in the
what's
center
there
code.
now. Yep.
So, because we do have that specific.
Yeah, and the center code is a different reg, so that's
Yeah.
a whole different conversation. And actually, the way the US Supreme Court case is listed, because that is its own zone.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's
It's a location.
pretty much okay. It's how many categories do we have in the center zone? So that's a little bit unique in and of itself, just like the Hartford form-based code would be unique in and of itself. So,
Just a matter of all of us
those are a little
agreeing on how
different.
to
Well,
handle it.
yeah, and I emailed Mike about a different plaza in town that has no directory sign. And from the sidewalk, there are businesses that are below street level. That has no directory. There is no directory sign. So I, to Mike, questioned the need for a directory sign at a location from the sidewalk where you can read every single business. So this one has a tougher location with no directory. This one is fairly plain, easy to see from the sidewalk. So,
It wasn't just the
Also,
directory, though, it was all the
until
colors.
recently, it was
Yeah,
under
yeah,
ownership.
could I just,
Plazas.
since we're
Yeah.
talking about an active application, I think we really gotta end this
so
conversation.
we'll talk about that.
In fairness to the
Okay.
applicant, so they
Is
afforded a
that
fair
also
hearing.
June 3rd?
That would be June 3rd.
Yep.
Popcorn and coffee will be provided. So, just one point, I'm sorry we tabled this action, but it was just brought to my attention by an email. The Performing Arts Center actually had their sign up. Mark just emailed me. So, I know Mark Deming just left, but for application 1928, They actually did have their sign up for 15 days. I had received an email, and I apologize to the commission. I'm prepared to explain the application on their behalf quick.
If you're going to, I'm on the board, and I'd need to recuse myself.
Yeah, that wouldn't give us enough, that wouldn't give us a
Yes, it would.
quorum.
Yeah, you have
you
four,
would.
we have four.
Yeah, you're good.
And
So
I'm-
we could
And I'm-
hear
I'm
this
so-
and
I'm-
vote on it
Yes,
tonight?
you could.
Okay,
You could.
yeah.
And I apologize for this, and I would have had a staff report prepared. Please, excuse me. So,
I think it's funny.
I have no genie in my
She put the
pocket.
jacket on.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you're sweating. I know, he's done.
We're still waiting on Stephen.
Yeah.
So the Performing Arts Center has a dilemma. They have all their chairs they store for events. Right now, they store them by the band shell, they put a tarp over them. They want a permanent location where to store them. They're proposing to do a roofed addition, which was reviewed by the Board of Selectmen, Planning Commission, and the Inland Wetlands Agency. Their initial proposal was to put it on the eastern facade of the storage barn.
Yeah.
However, the Wetlands Commission asked that it be relocated to the western elevation due to longstanding compliance issues the commission had.
And that's dirt and gravel, right? On this, yeah.
On this side, yeah.
Yep.
So really, it's just a roof with some beams that they'll store chairs underneath when between events.
It's like a woodshed, it's open.
Yeah, it's a woodshed.
It's open?
Yeah, it's
open, yeah.
open.
It's open with, yeah.
But it just gives them,
Just make it nicer, close it.
So,
I'm just asking.
yeah.
yeah.
Seems like a poor solution to a significant problem.
Yeah, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but
That's the best they can come up with. What do you do with that?
the problem they have is just they want something all-weather to store the chairs under.
Yep.
This is in the back, although the lean-to is gonna be in the front of this structure, it's not something that will be highly visible from Iron Horse Boulevard. It'll only be visible once you're in the actual parking
If you're
lot.
parking, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
And then
go to the dog
also,
park, you can
during,
see it. That's
during
where the barn
events,
is.
you just see this roofed overhang, but you wouldn't see the chairs, because the chairs would be out in the field. So, I mean, if you think of it, the visual impacts this may have would be during an event.
Well, it just doesn't seem like a roof is gonna keep the chairs from being wet, though.
They put tarps over them now.
I think, Mike, it can't be enclosed because it's in the floodplain, correct?
Well, that's it.
So the
And I
reason
also
why
think-
they can't enclose it is because it's in the floodplain, and you can't have the enclosed structure, you can't build it.
There's not another place they could put the structure for the chairs that they could make it nicer, that they could enclose it?
So if they put it off the band shell, they had plans of additions and putting bathrooms, et cetera,
Yep.
off the band shell.
Yep.
Then it's right in the parking lot where patrons are going. They already use this area for storage right now, although they were using behind the storage building along the eastern facade for some of the long-term materials and other things that went back there, toys, et cetera. So this was their solution to say, we want a roof, we don't want to put it under tarps, and they pay a lot of money. They bought the chairs that they had before they were renting them. So,
Well, they still have to cover the chairs even under there,
I
just to
know.
keep
Yeah,
them from
it's
getting
gonna rain
dusty.
right in there.
It's
Or
gonna-
I think they're gonna have to do a
Breeze
tarp
and you're-
just under
They have to
there.
wrap them underneath.
Yeah.
With a tarp or something, but it would at least, it consolidates their storage.
It's gonna be ugly and you are gonna see, I mean, everybody's gonna see it, because
Yeah.
that's where you go to park, and then there's even parking further behind that.
The dilemma is that conservation, well, they didn't deny their application, they recommended that it be
They asked at the
relocated.
meeting if they had an issue with moving the overhang to the front of the building, to which their executive director stated she did not. As it was located on the back of the building, it was noted that the site plan that the town has showing the wetland lines is not correct. And the wetlands were located approximately 3 feet off the edge of the structure.
Yeah, they're flagged. You can see it's right there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the plan that was done for the town back in
2014.
2015 or 14 does
14,
not
actually.
accurately depict the wetland line, so it showed the wetland line as 40 feet off the back of the building, when in fact it's 20 feet off, and this proposed structure is at like 18 feet with the overhang, so.
I just wonder what good the structure's gonna do if it's open like
Well, both, and it's
Yeah,
gonna be very
yeah, it's
visible.
only- Yeah, it must
Yeah.
probably better on the back.
But in off-season, they'll move the So that the chairs will just be down there during the season, and then off-season, they'll be moved to a climate-controlled location. So that's the other thing too. I mean, really, it'd just be between events during the season, you're gonna see these.
Yeah, but not all the events use chairs. They're chairs.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
not
you know, but,
necessarily.
yeah, so you
Yeah.
could be going there for something else, and this will be very visible.
So you'd be more in favor, probably both of you, if it was enclosed?
Shutters or something.
Yeah.
I mean, number one, it makes more sense. It doesn't seem
Well,
very
it
functional.
detracts from the barn.
Yeah, it does.
Would you, if they were to propose something such as a screen around it or curtain, would you be in favor of it? Because I'm trying to think of a way to
The Wetlands Commission
balance
actually did recommend they put some kind of,
curtain.
they said curtain, for lack of a better word, in the front and on the sides, just to kind of block the view of, and add a little bit. You can't enclose it because it's in the floodplain, so you are very limited as to what you can do.
But shutters aren't an enclosure, are they?
Shutters would allow water passage or.
Well, if you have the chairs in there, they're impacting the flow of water if it were
They
a
have to
flood.
remove them, they have to have an emergency plan to remove them.
They were
Well,
gonna,
then they could pull the shutters back.
Open them up.
Right, I mean, number one, it just doesn't seem like it's gonna keep the rain away from the chairs,
Yeah.
and number two is gonna be ugly.
I think also they were looking to do a economic,
Right.
economical,
Yeah.
solution for this
Yeah.
dilemma. So I think we're creeping a little beyond
It's
where.
better than what they have now, which is they put them on the back of the building and they're exposed to all of the elements. So this provides them at least some form of cover
Yeah.
for their chairs.
And also, since they own these chairs long-term, they're gonna wanna, if they notice that, hey, this is not really working out as expected, they may be coming in to say, I wanna expand the barn, I wanna enclose this entirely.
I think that's kind of what we're thinking though, is just, the
Go ahead
barn
and
is,
do it.
is okay. Yeah, obviously, you see the barn, you come in, it's in your line of sight.
Well, is the west side of the barn in the flood zone? I mean, we got the barn there.
It's just on the edge.
Really tight.
No, the
according to
east side
farm.
is, you said, but what about the west side where they're putting some now?
If I recall, the line goes. $157.
So how did they get the barn there if it's in the wetlands?
Oh.
That's a good question.
Oh,
They
that's
have
good.
a long-standing issue
Well-
with the buildings
Yeah,
back
that
there.
It's 9 o'clock, I don't.
Yeah.
We don't wanna talk
We don't wanna
about
talk
that.
about that tonight,
Years.
But
so.
is your point that if the barn
Well,
is
the barn
there-
door is an
Right.
obstruction, so I thought it was
Couldn't they
okay.
add on something that is enclosed?
Yeah,
If,
covered,
in theory,
but apparently it's not.
I mean, there's ways to do it, but then also then, it runs into that they would have to get an engineer out there to look at, equal conveyance and potentially compensatory storage as expansion of the footprint. The other, thing that'll come into play is, the structure itself would be considered a substantial improvement, and therefore you have to, accommodate this, passage of waters, so flood vents or some other sort of improvements to address that.
could you give them our concerns and just see if there's a solution beside?
Staff can work with them and try to find a solution for screening that
I don't
may
think we're not
fulfill
in
both.
favor of storage, for sure, but because it's so visible,
Do
I
you,
know-
do you want to authorize staff to work with them on developing a screening plan for it, meaning either shutters, curtains, something, and we can bring that back to you on what they can do?
Louvered shutters.
Something barn-like,
Yeah, but it's, yeah.
not like curtain.
They may be spending more money though on trying to come up with alternatives than this thing's
Just
gonna
add
cost the way
well,
it's.
and the
Yeah.
chairs are just sitting out there right now, you know what I mean, unprotected.
Yeah, that's also the only comment is that
Right.
it's just, this may drive the cost up on this project where this was the quick fix right now, their solution. I mean, and like I
No,
said, if they
but-
were allowed to go on the eastern elevation of the building, it's a different story, but I mean,
I know.
there's
But
compliance
when
issues with
they added
the,
on the ticket thing, I mean, everything that's being done does impact, I mean, this is public.
Mhm.
When you drive in there, that's what you see, is that barn, you know? Unfortunately, it's visible.
So they weren't talking about paving or concrete foundation or anything, they're just gonna put it right on top of the
No,
gravel?
actually,
What if they just walled the front? Would that run into compliance issues with the flood zone?
that may work.
And they kept the two sides?
They may
They
work,
just walled
actually,
the
that may
front.
work.
What if they walled the front, made it barn-like, but kept the two sides open, which are
Slide 'em
not
in
in
and
your
out.
direct view?
Yeah, that
I
would
think
work.
that's better.
And how high do they actually go? I'm not sure they have to go to the ceiling either.
Well, that way it would look like a lean-to on the barn.
Yeah.
Like a
Well,
barn.
lean to,
Right.
but it
Right.
look- yeah, but.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
closed.
And if
for
we left
the
an
first
open
time.
Right, right.
It's, the opening is only 8 feet to the ceiling. 9 at the peak.
Yeah, I mean, I'd almost be better off going higher and putting something on the front of it.
Yeah, I think that's better.
So you would like a walled screening along the
Yeah, match it with
Western
the,
side.
match it with the
Just
barn.
Yeah.
western
And then-
elevation of the proposed addition.
Yeah, and then the two sides be open, is what you're saying?
Yep,
Yep.
that may work.
It actually,
The
something that
skinny-
would
the
work with
skinny
the barn, it
sides.
actually looks like where you, animals would go.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
lean-to shed
Lean-to,
or
yeah,
something
yeah.
on the barn, right.
Okay. We can work with them on that. That's reasonable. Yeah, that'll work.
And
Better-
they
it's
actually,
better
they don't
than
stack
curtains
8
and-
feet.
Do you know what I
right?
mean?
No, it definitely, yeah. It was the flood thing we were
Yeah.
struggling with,
Oh,
but
yeah.
that keeps.
But
them-
yeah, to your point, right, you probably stack the chairs, what, 5 feet?
Yeah, I can't imagine them going to the
Usually.
ceiling of
Get
that.
pretty heavy that way.
Yeah, very. Okay.
Are you okay with staff working with them and reporting back to you and granting them an approval? Or would you like to see,
I think we need to see it,
see it? That's fine.
otherwise you can work with them.
I'll relay the message.
All right, so we'll continue our table on that one.
Do you want to call him back in, and do you want to see if they're okay, or do you think they need a consult?
They rode off on a horse.
It's been more than a few minutes.
Pegasus.
Oh my God, that was my word.
Yeah,
I
maybe
said,
put wings on it.
That's what I said.
Totally,
We already have
It would actually
Pegasus
fit
down the
in
street.
better with the Greek restaurant.
right?
Oh, we got Mike back. Forgot about you.
I feel like you moved on to other topics and left me out.
No, believe it or not, that was all about
That
it.
was all.
It's all
What do we
about the
think?
lean-to.
There's no eraser on it.
Yeah.
Ready?
Okay.
So, had a meeting with the owner, the owner's wife, and the owner's mother-in-law, who's here from out of town. And we all stand strong on keeping the horse in its position as designed. Basically, there's was 2 meetings with design review who approved it, multiple meetings with the staff, none of which had any issue with the location of the horse, nor any zoning compliance issues. Also, the restaurant itself is a unique restaurant inside for sure. So what's happening outside is to continue that uniqueness by putting the horse, of course, on the roof, keeping the Statue of Liberty as part of the exterior facade. The horse also has basically nods to historical character of the state. In sense, we talked about the Colt Building dome and the gold horse that used to be on that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Come on, he used to have a horse inside that would fog out its bottom.
Fine, because it was inside.
So-
That's what you went there
There's
for.
historical relevance to a horse San Antonio's. Now he's bringing the horse outside and elevating it prominently.
With the 8-ball, inside.
So we're certainly trying to create, a unique building, a building that acts as a gateway to Simsbury, to the north end, and also has some historical landmark cues. The owner's wife also mentioned, while we're out there, the restaurant, as I mentioned, is unique inside, exciting inside. So we're bringing that outside so that way, kids and families recognize it as a family-friendly restaurant.
And I stand corrected, it was a deer's bottom, if I remember correctly, not a horse's bottom.
Okay. Go against it.
I'm gonna have to. I mean, it's-
All right, are we ready to make a motion here?
Darwin?
Mike?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve application 1926 of Christopher Millard, Agent 5 Ants LLC, owner for a site plan amendment for the facade improvements in addition to existing building on the property located at 1185 Hot Meadow Street. The site plan amendment is subject to the following conditions of approval. 1, an administrative zoning compliance review application is required for the facade improvements and addition to the existing building. And 2, any modifications to these plans be brought in front of the zoning commission for their approval.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second.
Thank you, Bruce.
All right. So we're going with the horse as it was submitted. That's the, that's the
whole
motion. All right, just so you know how you're voting here. Are we ready for a vote? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm opposed.
We got one opposed.
Just because of the horse. I told you, I like the facade. I like what you're doing.
Okay, motion passed.
Okay, there you
Thank you very
go.
much.
All right,
I get a Pegasus.
then we are ready for a motion to
You
adjourn.
did it.
Anybody? Motion to adjourn.
To adjourn. Oh, thank God.
So moved.
Second.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're done.
Thank you for staying.